Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Sociology of Media Voices series. And today we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Julie Peters. And we're lucky enough to have Dr. Julie Peters today. And she is one of the co founders of Transgender Victoria and the first openly trans person to run for Parliament in Australia for what was then known were the Australian Democrats. G, Dr. Julie um, talks to us about her life, her journeys, her work with the ABC, as well as shedding some light on her PhD, which was quite fascinating for myself, quite inspiring for my own research development, where it was titled is titled, sorry, A Feminist Post-Transsexual Auto-Ethnography on Challenging Normative Gender Coercion. So we welcome today an academic trailblazer of her time to our series. Welcome, Dr. Julie Peters.
That's you recording. I can't record yet.
Oh, okay. What we might do, I'll just pause that.
Yep, I can. I'm recording. Now you must record as well.
Okay. And now let's hear.
Getting confused.
No worries. And it's over now to you, Dr. Julie Peters. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Oh, where do I start? Well, I'm getting on now. Mutton is the new lamb. And I've I started, believe it or not, at Melbourne Uni in 1969, and in retrospect, it wasn't the best course to try because my very first year at Melbourne Uni was doing first year electrical engineering, and and it turned out that was quite homophobic, and there was very little awareness of trans in those days, but I certainly felt very stressed around a lot of my fellow students. I did manage to scrape through first year, and I got into second year, but I changed to science because there was a lot more women in science. And when I but then I dropped out because I still was really having a lot of stress over, because I was still living as a boy, and I was really quite. I just didn't really feel I fitted in. I had at a deep emotional level, just couldn't believe why people didn't realise I was a girl from before I started primary school, and so it was really really hard to just keep up the performance of trying to perform, how people expected me to perform, which is, the masculine, because most people believe there are two genders rightly determined by biology. And so they believed that I ought to perform the masculine, which, just didn't really work with me.
And tell me, at that period of time, what was the thinking at the time about the issue of one who's, they weren't, say, transgender at that, because I think the word for it at that stage was still transsexual. Was it transsexual even applied in 1969?
Well, I don't think I hadn't heard it. I hadn't heard it in
Mm-hmm.
'69. I think what I'd heard, that there were people who had sex changes who worked in the nightclubs up in Sydney, and that was about the only thing I had heard of. And a year or so later, I heard that there was some famous trans people in maybe America and one in England, like maybe there was three in the world, but they, as soon as they transitioned, that they were, they had the whole world staring at them, and I just didn't think I could cope with that.
Mm. And your time at Melbourne Uni, do you try and do your own investigation? That's by like going into the library and trying to locate through the card catalogs or
I
anything about the condition or
not
the.
not then, because I was pretty naive, but I dropped out, and I came back about 7 or 8 years later to try and finish my degree. And at that stage, I had read a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
So we're now talking like late 70s, early 80s. And so, yeah, I spent a fair bit of time in the medical library, trolling through the archives of sexual research and things, archives of sexual behaviour, I think it might have been. Yeah, and found lots of articles. And what you did in those days was you put 5 cents in the machine, and you for each page you wanted to photocopy. So I copied the journals.
And what was it like for you, like in the 70s and 80s, in terms of work? What was it like for someone who felt discomfort in the body that they were born in, trying to work?
Well, I felt it was too unsafe to try and transition at work, and I worked in a fairly arty end of because I did it. I got really involved in student theatre at Melbourne Uni, and then from there drifted into television. So I ended up at the
yes, that's right,
ABC in the early 70s, when we were still in black and white, believe it or not, and got to work on shows like I got to work on the very first episode of Countdown, for example.
Oh my God, my favourite show! I love that show, and I remember that was 1975.
Well, yeah, we did the first shows live to air. No, they weren't live to air. They were recorded on Saturday for Sunday. But we did some pilots in 1974, and I worked on the pilots as well.
Wow, what an incredible time, Julie, if I might say. How did you feel being around creative people in that period of time in the 70s? Did it
Well, that's one of the reasons I was able to cope, I think, because I was around so many creative people. And towards the late 70s, I started to do things like, I was presenting as a boy at work, but I started to go to dress-up parties as a girl. And what most people sort of realised is this isn't somebody doing drag. This is somebody who's trying to look like a girl, and they weren't quite, quite know how to take it. And but for me, it was a bit of an experiment in like, could my workplace cope? But I didn't really think it could for another decade or so, and maybe it was just a bit of my own. Because I think the trouble is, because I grew up in Catholic schools, and I grew up in very transphobic and homophobic times. I had a lot of internalized homophobia and transphobia, and so I then I had to deal with that as well. But I understood logically that wasn't right. That was really ridiculous. But part of me never really wanted to be trans. I wanted to be a woman. And that was quite a psychological journey. Now, I did go through psychological. I did actually. I do remember. Sorry, too many thoughts at once. I did have a lot of visiting psychologists and psychiatrists to try and help me talk things through. Mainly because I didn't really have a lot of peers who I could talk to about these things. But in the end, what really helped me the most was peer support. So round about 1990, which was the year I transitioned in the workplace, I found some really great peer support, and we called ourselves the Gang of Four, and even 30 years later, we're still Zooming.
Oh, that's wonderful. And during this period of time, transitioning, that word, I guess for me it's affirming, going into work that first day as Julie. Can I take you back there? What was that like, that feeling of like driving or catching the bus, going into the studio space?
Well,
how did it feel?
Well, I had psyched myself up for it because I knew there were certain people who were going to be quite stressed by it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you got to realise that 30 years ago I was 30 years cuter than I am now, and I remember one of the lighting guys looked me up and down and said, "You ought to have transsexual tattooed on your forehead so blokes like me aren't tricked into being poofters."
Oh.
And I just said to him, "Don't be an idiot." But what it meant was, I was portraying the sort of woman he found attractive, but I wasn't interested in him at all. So but and I guess we did talk about transition in those days. But I can totally see what you're saying. It's about affirming your true gender, or the way you want to portray yourself.
Yeah. And what was it like? Because I have this image that working in ABC, which would have been a lot of the dreams of many of us in that period of time, was it an accepting work space for you when you first became Miss Julie?
So interestingly, it's because I remember I'd spent some time doing student theatre at Melbourne Uni, and what I found there was a great acceptance of it, of particularly of sexuality diversity in theatre at the time. But when I got to the ABC, I felt it had shifted. It shifted a little bit because there's an awful lot of techie blokes who were the technicians and the cameramen and a few other jobs like that, who were pretty well just straight blokes, and they were. I think the word probably is tolerant. They were tolerant because we had directors and producers who were gay and very out about it, but there were hardly any on the crew, and so it became. It wasn't as friendly to LGBT as theatre, and in fact, I don't think I met anybody who was out as a lesbian for another 10 years after I joined.
Oh my gosh.
There were plenty of out gay men in the early 70s. In fact, it was called the Gay BC, but that was a very small percentage. But the straight guys were tolerant of it. They weren't 100% accepting, I wouldn't say. And then it was 20 years before there was an out trans person, which is me, I believe. I think I'm the first out trans person at the ABC.
My mind's sort of blowing just to think, wow, how incredible to be at that moment in that space. And maybe just reflecting a bit about media at that time, even in the ABC and in the period of you've worked there for quite a long time, and that you have seen a lot of changes. Around the time when you were going through affirming yourself as Julie in the 90s, was there more, and I'm just trying to reflect back myself at the time and the type of shows that were being broadcast in the ABC, was it still very much something that was fetishized in some ways, being trans or even...
Yeah, no, good question. To an extent it was, because, even in the mid-70s, we had AC/DC on, and, they were playing with gender a fair bit. As was, there were a lot of rock stars, pop stars at that time. We had Boy George on and quite a few other people who were, playing with gender. But the crew weren't like that. And it was expected that side of the camera, you could be gender non-normative, but this side of the camera, behind the camera, you had to be gender normative. So as an overview, I would say that's the general feel at the time.
And that would have made it really hard too, because I'm imagining that in your position where you were working on as managing and coordinating, was it hard to get respect in terms of the male staff around you to take your direction?
Well, for a start, I'd been there pretty close to 20 years before I affirmed my gender, and so I was already, I was a lighting director rather than, for example, I wasn't a lighting assistant, which meant that the other people. So there was a hierarchy. So I was. And they tend to just react to the hierarchy,
as opposed to you, the woman.
Okay. Yeah. But I still had that. They still had to believe. I think one of the women said to me, the reason you've got away with this so well is because everybody believes you're really competent.
Oh, interesting. And how did that make you feel, Julie, when you heard that people respected your work?
Oh, well, I sort of thought they ought to, because I was doing a pretty good job, I thought. Some of my bosses weren't so keen, and they did. Once I affirmed my gender, I did actually lose some. I found it hard to get the best shows. I often got the B or C shows rather than the A shows.
Oh. So there was some sort of level of people being uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, totally.
Closely.
Yeah. And it was often the hierarchy of the department I was in. But in the early 2000s, I took a different job. I became the outside broadcast supervisor in Tasmania, and outside broadcast is probably the butchest area of the ABC. In that's where we've got take all the trucks out to a footy ground and set up the cameras and run out cables and stuff like that and do sport or whatever. And but the fact that I was I realized what I was doing there. I didn't. I fitted into a trope which existed already, which is like the older sister who organises things.
That's been wonderful, and you learned so many things, and you've been so many wonderful people. Is there any particular moment working at the ABC that sticks out to you as a moment where you thought, "Oh my God, this is so good"? Like, was there an event or a particular program you were on that really made you feel?
Oh yeah, in a way there were like hundreds of great ones, but there are a lot of boring ones as well, I have to say. Because I was never totally into sport, so I did 3 years. I did probably 3 plus 5 years of 8 years of sport, and I got to know how it worked. But but some of the really fun ones were like after one of the shows after Countdown was Countdown Revolution.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. So I got to probably one of the best ones I remember of that was that we got to do some big outside broadcasts. We did Countdown Revolution live from Chincopuc, which was
never heard of it.
Chincopuc is sort of west of Swan Hill and south of Mildura, way up in that part of Victoria. And we also did great big. I set up a big rock and roll stage in Adelaide Railway Station, for example.
Incredible.
So that was good fun. But I guess in the end, though, it was relationships I built, and after a while, what I found quite intriguing, like 10 when I came back to Victoria in like 2009, 2010. What I found interesting was that most people back in Victoria had even forgotten my old name, and they just didn't really, and they just found it, because in their own heads, and this is where like Irving Goffman talks about scripts, where we have gender scripts, and and at one level I portray, even though I'm very out, most people take me to be a fairly cis-normative woman, and this is part of a thing about my age, is that with my generation, I'm going to turn that off so it doesn't go ding anymore. With my generation, particularly from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was so much easier if most people thought you were the gender you portrayed yourself as, in terms of reducing, because I got some, it was quite dangerous at times, because there's so many trans women around the world who've been killed when they are discovered to be trans. And this goes back to a little bit what I was saying. Some straight men feel that they've been tricked into homosexuality, even though I don't see that. I see myself as a woman. So if a straight guy found me attractive, why would that be homosexual? But they
because we feel we're women. We don't think as though a man looking at a man as a man. I agree totally, Julie. Yes.
Yeah, but they don't see it that way necessarily, and that's why I took that into account in terms of safety, I suppose. And you know, and I guess I've lost the train of my thought there. But basically, all I'm trying to say though is that I've been fairly lucky in my body size and shape in terms of the fact that when I then returned to the ABC, most people just treated me the way they would treat a normal woman. Now, the exception was all the males who knew my history didn't hassle me because even if they found me attractive, they didn't want to be seen to be finding me attractive in front of their colleagues. So and that's, I would still say that's true today. That one of the ways I tell it, if a straight man finds me attractive, people will say I've tricked him into homosexuality, or some people will. But if a gay man finds me attractive, people will say I've tricked him into being straight. If a straight woman finds me attractive, people will say I've tricked her into being lesbian. But if a lesbian finds me attractive, people will, particularly the radfems, will certainly say I've tricked her into heteronormativity. But the thing is, the way I see it, you have to just forget all that. You just have to see me as an individual beyond gender.
Absolutely, darling. Absolutely.
And if you see me beyond gender, well, yeah, you're fine. It's only if you want to gender me or really gender stereotype me that you might have trouble.
And that's so important. Let's now go forward. Your participation and founding of Transgender Victoria, I was reading that you were heavily involved in that space early on.
It was a group. Well, it was indirect because I was very heavily involved in setting up the gay and lesbian rights, what's currently called the Gay and Lesbian Rights Lobby in Victoria.
I remember that, yes.
Yeah. But what happened, I was on the steering committee that set up that group. And all the way along, I was wanting to call it something like the Gender and Identity Rights Lobby. Sexuality and identity rights lobby, or something like that. I wanted it to be about gender diversity, not just trans people. So I didn't want to call it trans even. And basically, when we had the big public meeting to vote to set up this organisation, which was at a little hall in Paran, it was voted down. Basically, they said we don't want to include trans. I was really, there was about 10 or 15 of us there. I was just really stressed by that. And so, I said, we're going to form the Transgender Rights Lobby. And so we went away, and we didn't quite know what I was actually at that point still asked to join the Gay and Lesbian Rights Lobby committee, but I thought, why would I want to join that committee if they're not going to support trans people? Anyway, so I don't have an infinite amount of energy, even though I think that's all important, and I still do things in that sphere, last year, I've worked in. I'm the ABC Pride champion for Victoria at the moment. So that's LGBTIQ I plus. I can't remember how many letters there are. And I do always think much broader than than trans or gender diversity. But I felt that needed more energy. So I'm pretty sure it was Kayleen White and Sally Goldner went to there was at that stage a group called Transgender Liberation and Care, TLC, which was a nice acronym.
Yeah.
So it was Transgender Liberation and Care, and initially it became a subcommittee of that group, but in the end there was a bit of tension because TLC was a support group, whereas we were trying to be a rights lobby. Now, it wasn't my first attempt. I also set up a group back in the early 90s, which so that we could write to the federal government, and so we got a really good submission and were called as Senate witnesses in the mid 90s, which was good. But that act didn't get up. It was a Senate committee, and it was three Conservatives and three Labor, and Natasha Stott-Despoja in the middle. So it made a little bit of progress, but the Minority Report from some very conservative Liberals voted it down. But I guess I saw it as a process. I made an effort in that time, and that was at the same time I ran for Parliament. I was running I ran for Parliament for the Democrats 5 times, as it turns out. I didn't really have a chance of being elected because another 3 or 4 years I might have been elected, but basically the Democrats fell apart by then, unfortunately. But I ran for the Democrats because they were quite they had been very pro gay, lesbian, trans from when they were formed in the mid 70s, which was quite unusual. They were very out about it too. So that was one of the reasons I was very comfortable with them. And now where did I go with that? So I tried. That was me trying mainstream politics. Look, and maybe I might try it again, but I certainly can't do that while I'm at the ABC, because that's would raise a conflict of interest, of course. And the other thing which I had started to do when I looked it up, I was a bit surprised. The first time I did public speaking on transgender diversity was 1981.
Okay, what a period of time to do that, in a period when I guess AIDS was just sort of coming into the narrative in the media.
And that's very true. And that was particularly in some of the, there was a lot of homophobia went through the roof from about 83 to about 87 because of HIV, AIDS. And that's part of the other reason I kept a low profile during that period. But see, in 81, I addressed third-year medical students at Monash.
Okay.
But even then, I got a lot of sniggers and laughing at me at that time. From
medical. So these are probably doctors who are now top physicians running clinics. But at that time, it was still seen as some type of ridicule. We were still being ridiculed.
But fortunately, I'm pretty tough, so I just kept going. And what I was leading to, I've done probably hundreds of events, public speaking on transgender diversity over the years. And actually, reminds me, I've got to call somebody back. Sorry.
No, that's good. It all helps. It's all coming up the same. I'm thinking always 101 things. And that's why I was so fascinated, but I was reading more about things you've done, and an incredible life journey and then you embarked on doing your PhD. And it's such Go for it. Sorry, Julie.
Oh, no, that's how it happened, is because as I started speaking to more and more uni students, I was thinking, and I was often speaking to 200 to 300 or 400 uni students a year, and I was thinking, well, this is exhausting because I was often doing 2-hour workshops and things with them, and then I just mentioned to Dr. Maria Pallotta-Chiaroli, who was at Deakin in the School of Health at the time, a sociologist out there, and I said, well, she had invited me that particular time, and I said, well, you think I could take this further by doing a master's degree or something? And she said, oh, no, PhD. And so I went, oh, that's a bit of a shock. PhD is a fair bit of work. And then I didn't jump into it. I thought about it for quite a few months, because I thought, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. But that means, and because I still need to earn an income, I
Mm-hmm.
knew I could only do it part-time, which
Mm-hmm.
meant that I really had to commit for, 8 years really.
Mm.
And, so, this is one of those times where I used my stubbornness for good, not evil, where I basically, well, once I started, I started. So, that I did big literature research, but what I was expecting to do, and if you look at uh, my initial report as to my initial submission,
Mm-hmm.
I was planning to interview a lot of people, but,
Mm-hmm.
but then when Maria mentioned the concept of autoethnography to me, I realized, well, yes, I do have to admit, that to do this properly, I have to take a trans voice in this research, or I have to. It has to be my voice, and so autoethnography, which is an ethnography or an anthropology of the self or your own group. I thought, well, at least I have to start with that. But when but I talk too much, as you might have worked out already. And
Not at all, Julie.
uh,
For me, it's all passion. I feel it and I relate to it. So please don't stop.
yeah,
We're all
yeah.
loving it.
And so what it meant was the first draft of my thesis was like 300,000 words,
Mm.
and
Wow.
Maria almost fainted when she saw it. Uh, but and so and also the fact that there were so many parts of the academy that really wanted to talk about gender,
Mm-hmm.
and so when I thought, well, I'll probably, and by this stage I try, well, because I wanted to make a difference to people's lives. I felt very comfortable doing it in the School of Health because
Mm-hmm.
I was in this stream of social development. So
Mm-hmm.
and so the themes in my thesis were I was going blank. So were uh, promoting social. I have to edit there. Um, one of the major themes of my thesis was promoting social justice and equity. So
Mm-hmm.
so so in a way, I had three research questions. The first research question was really very much about it's a dual purpose. It was about getting across what it feels like to be trans, because I felt that all the non-trans literature in academia was very, very um, old-fashioned, logical, and I mean, not that I'm unlogical, but it was very, very staid, and it was very much in the third person. And
Absolutely. I remember that
yeah,
myself at that period of time. Yes. Written by that sort of looking back, but not looking from within
yeah,
outwards.
yeah. So and often, looking like with eyes agog, going, "Oh, these are weird people, aren't they?"
Mm.
And I didn't want to take that approach. So so the first research question was trying to get across what it's like to be trans, but both in terms of helping trans people and gender diverse people see themselves in a broader light, but and depathologizing
Mm.
gender non-conformity, because so much of what's in well, all sorts of literature, particularly medical literature, trans and gender diversity is pathologized.
Mm.
And so I wanted to come up with a non-pathological um, understanding of trans and gender diversity. But as a second thing, one of the second research question was very much about well, uh, uh, if, the exception proves the rule. So if because most of the world believes that and unfortunately this is still true. I do think
Mm.
most of the world still believes this, that there are only two genders which are correctly determined by one's biology, then somebody like me, if you study somebody like me, which is the exception, it critiques the rule. So it gives you a better understanding of gender itself, what gender is. So, and then the third one was, well, if our current gender society is limiting trans and gender diversity people so much, what do we do about it? So it was very much about the promotion of public health in terms of basically saying that people who are gender diverse should be able to have really interesting, exciting lives. And I came up with this concept of a hierarchy. It's a little bit based on other hierarchies, but based on what I call the hierarchy of becoming. So the first one is basically meeting the necessities of life. Beyond that is getting some degree of agency in your own life. So I jumped one. So the first step is the necessities in life. The second one is health. We all have a right to health, but I mean health in terms of physical health, mental health, social health, and sociological health, and then there's agency. Having some third step is really having agency in life, and then beyond that, there's let's take it one step further. And then I got this concept from Foucault, who got it from Nietzsche, which is, let's make our lives works of art. Let's live a poetic life.
And that's all we ever want, and that it really encapsulates that whole essence. And I can totally relate to everything that you've just said. And I live my life through that sort of interplay between all those interconnections of the self. And I just wanted to add, Julie, that one thing that really strikes me, that second notion you raised about the biology binary, is that it's still being used today, and we're still being measured in response to that.
Oh, yeah, well, and well, I guess from that point of view, it needs a lot of people to be activists, but also I also feel that gender limits people. What most cis people don't realize is it limits them just as much as it limits us. And now there are some like upper class women, for example, who can become surgeons, awful lot of women can't, don't even finish school. So and awful lot of men can't, are also limited by the number of jobs and things and the way they need to live in the world. Particularly if you look at the whole world population, most people are limited by gender, and so with those three research questions, in my thesis, in my book, did I mention my book?
Yes, let's have a look. For everyone that's listening right now and watching, I would highly recommend you get a copy of this, because it is still relevant in 2021. And I do actually use sections of it for my own research, because it really does highlight, as what Julie has highlighted in her research, what's happening, and really gives us a frame.
And the title rolls off the tongue: A Feminist Post-Transsexual Autoethnography Challenging Normative Gender Coercion.
How wonderful is that? And Julie, I've got to ask you too, how does, taking from what you've written and where you thought we would be in 2021, do you think we've progressed further, or are we still stuck in this notion that we define everything by gender? Are people too frightened to let go of that notion of gender?
Well, as I said, most people still believe there are two genders, and I think basically it's an education thing. The better people are educated, and I think one of the reasons we're seeing far more people present as trans and gender diverse at the moment is because gender roles are becoming more and more severe. And interestingly, the first person I read on this was a paper in 75. Now I can't remember who it was. Ross was an Australian guy, but it was a study that, this is a 1974, 75 study that compared Australia and Sweden, and they're both similar in terms of, socio-economic terms, the same sort of size. I think at that stage they were both like about 15 million people or something.
Mm-hmm.
But Australia had something like 20 times the number of trans people as Sweden did. And the authors put it down to that the sex roles in Australia were far more rigid than in Sweden. So people, and if you look at the images particularly young girls see on in media today, you'll see that, particularly from groups like the Kardashians and things like that, that the gender roles are portrayed as very, very strongly, and the same for men and boys, in that they see, to be a successful athlete, you have to be quite macho. So I guess that's the only thought I've had. Oh, but with the book, did I mention that it was published by? So that's why it's relevant for TASA. Is it's published by Routledge Sociology. That's, I didn't mention that bit. I think I would. I just did now.
And that's what we love to hear. And it's so important. And that's what I love about your work too. It really does capture putting a lens, a real critical lens on gender, and looking at why are we frightened to move away from looking at roles and attributing certain roles, and genderizing a role, which I still find problematic, in 2021. That
Yeah. Look, and a lot of people have worked at it. Like even the Jungian psychologists were talking about androgyny as the ideal state back in the day. June Singer published a book called Androgyny. She called it bizarrely at one level androgyny, the new sexuality, or a new sexuality. But it's not really a sexuality. Basically, what Jung was saying was that, I wouldn't use these terms myself, because I'll explain in a sec why. But the male should embrace their feminine side, and the female should embrace their masculine side, because. But that basically says that there's a masculine and feminine in the first place. So basically, the way I see it is we should all allow ourselves a broad diversity of behaviour. But most people understand androgyny more easily in terms of the masculine and the feminine. But that's because we, the Jungians talk about animus and animal and anima, and So those concepts have been around a while. So Jung was early 20th century, and that book by June Singer was 1975. And to that extent, that's in a way how I did. I tried to live the androgynous lifestyle from when I had from the early 70s through to when I affirm my gender. But I'm still androgynous, even though I guess my aesthetic is quite feminine, because I just appreciate the feminine aesthetic. But I do see I want to break that nexus between, for a lot of people, femininity is about subjugation of women. I've got no problem with the feminine aesthetic, but as long as it doesn't come with all the other crap that most people want it to come with, such as, basically the subjugation of women, which has been, again, that's been discussed for centuries too, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And the fact that, as you're saying, and I really love that line where and that hopefully people take that on board, is that we embrace the aesthetic of feminine presentation in terms of the color, if you want to label it or ascribe it. So for me, I also feel that I don't bow down to a man. I don't wish to be dominated or somehow controlled, or I need a male figure in my life to feel fulfilled. I myself love the beauty of certain things, certain colors, and that to me is part of my nurture as well, my nurture nature, and my expression as like you. I don't necessarily have to outwardly, I don't do things, oh, that is female, so therefore I'm going to do makeup a certain way, or that. I do what I like in terms of the aesthetic, and I think a lot of, and we need to having more trans women, young trans women, to understand that, to realize that, to one, your identification should not rest with that perceived role of having to behave, as I call that Kardashian syndrome, to go down that pathway.
And I'd say, for me, I was observing a lot of other trans women, particularly in the 70s. They only felt fulfilled as women if they had a boyfriend, whereas because that proved to them that they were really women.
Yes, and that's just something we've got to move away from, that feeling, that notion that one's true essence of womanhood is that having a male, cisgendered male say to you and affirm yourself. And to me, it's like, well, hang on a minute. What are you saying? What are you playing on that? We all we're doing is you're tapping into the thing that we've been fighting for against. And for my beauty, and that's why I do a lot of poetry now. I talk to myself through the mirror, and I really try and encapsulate that, go deep within my soul. And I do believe, with my soul, it has the maleness and female, whatever you want to call it, but I'm more comfortable with that Jungian kind of concept of the energies. And for me, that's how I sort of live my life, and I talk to other people to help them use that way of understanding yourself. As you were saying, don't go into that argument of subjugating yourself into that role, which all it does then is plays into our opponents back to the biology argument. Because they'll turn around and say, but therefore you really do want to have the biology and the to make the DNA of being a woman. And my question is, what do you mean by woman?
Oh, well, and it also, I can see why some feminists also critique us in terms of the fact that means we're performing the stereotypical female rather than being ourselves. But I actually believe I'm portraying myself. Now, just to quote me from my own book.
Please do. We like that here.
Is that, and actually I first did this in a performance piece at Hares and Hyenas back in, I don't know when, 2012, I think. So partly, in a way, I realized I was inventing my own genders. And like one of the genders I invented was tomboy femme. I'm a tomboy femme. It's a noun phrase, a person who appreciates the feminine aesthetic, but whose performance of femininity is recast by an appreciation for building things, having unencumbered boyish fun, eating without guilt, and is happy getting dirty planting trees.
I love it. I totally love it. You're allowing us to be ourselves, and the freedom to partake in any action that brings us in touch with the environment. And then it touches onto obviously my own Indigenous space, my own love of the soul and the environment. And I think that is what it comes to, isn't it? That freedom to be ourselves, but yet resonate with that aesthetic.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful quote. I love it. I'm going to have to borrow it, I think, and I'll definitely attribute it to you as one of my highlight on my quotes. I must plaster that around my whiteboards, because that really does sort of it gives me that freedom, or should I say that permission? Not that I need, but kind of sometimes, because the tapes in our head sometimes.
Oh yeah. And in a way, I found that by being able to articulate it, to myself, and performing it, in cabaret, if that's really the right word, it made it stronger. And now it's published. It's published in a book, So from that point, it's it made me feel that it was that we've got to really invent the genders we need to perform ourselves, rather than be limited by the genders which are out there. And I just thought, that's what I was playing with that. But that's it. But part of one of my next little projects, which
Please tell us, because we're really interested to now know.
I've already done small versions of this, but because enough people haven't read my thesis and haven't read my book, I've got this crazy concept. No, it's a great concept of turning my PhD into a cabaret. So yeah,
that is wonderful.
To do stand-up sociology. So that's
I love it. Wonderful. And let's do that. And that's wonderful. And as we wrap up, I want to also ask this space, Julie, I would love to have you back again to talk more, because I feel that there's so much more we can discuss. And I really would like to, in our next time, we talk about more about some of your work and your idea about using language as a powerful way to deconstruct what was constructed for us growing up and the scripts that we thought, and to really challenge and use that voice of your saying about the language to kind of free us.
Yeah.
The women that we are.
Well, particularly Irving Goffman talks about gender scripts, the fact that he actually says there's no such thing as gender, there's only scripts to portray gender. And he wrote that in the 60s or 70s. Can't remember that. Now, what occurred to me, this could be a good finish, and if you don't like it, you can just cut it off.
No, darling, I never edit, but you please do. Please read it. We all want to hear it.
And this is how I finished the autoethnography part of my thesis and the book. And it's yes. So one day I saw it. People created gender. Its rules arbitrary. I grew to see that cultural limits are mere mists. The cage is unlocked. The choices are mine. Tomboy femme, maiden matriarch, and the as yet undreamed of. A room of my own and friends. Privacy, separatism, and cooperation. Having recognition as a peer in the social world. Having a perceived to be normal gendered life and yet transcending. Will to knowledge, will to agency, will to beauty. The will to become my own true self. I live to journey, energized by questions unanswered. Comfortable in my own skin, head and heart are friends. Lithe, delicate, uncaged and untamed. I lie on my grassy hill in the sun and stretch. I hardly know what gender is.
Oh, that's a wonderful way to leave our audience captivated and really considering those lines. Because for me, it really frees up me, gives me that wonderful feeling that I am who I am. And as Shirley Bassey says, and that so be it. Thank you so much, Dr. Julie Peters. It has been an absolute privilege to speak with you, and we'll look forward again to another session where we can really delve into that whole idea of scripts and really taking further your ideas and your theory that you have postulated into a way of living that perhaps new, young, trans, gender diverse women coming up through the ranks can take on board and take further. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.